Is it on?
Oh, sorry. It's okay. Okay.
Okay, so this got a little bit messed up from my PowerPoint to here, but the talk is called Chinese as an Intellectual Development Challenge because I wanted to talk about ways in which Chinese can be valuable to study that don't necessarily mean increased job prospects or more money or things like that. So just like ways in which Chinese is really, really useful and fun and important, but it's not necessarily gonna help you out in the labor market. I think that Chinese does help people find jobs, but that's not really the purpose of my talk as well. Though I will talk a little bit about how to leverage it, or leverage Chinese for how I did at least for these other scholarships. So this is my 自我介绍. My name in Chinese is An Zhe. Zhang Laoshi gave me that name, and I really like it because An is like peaceful, and Zhe is the abbreviation for 哲学, which is philosophy. So I like to think of myself as someone who has a very peaceful philosophy. And it's because my last name is Alan, so An, and then I go by Jer, so Zhe. It works pretty well. So I'm an OU student. I'm graduating in this May with degrees in economics, Chinese, and environmental sustainability. Mainly because after I was in Beijing for a year, that's a lot of credits to add for Chinese. And then I also, as she mentioned, as Julia mentioned, I leveraged Chinese, I think, for definitely these two scholarships and partly for the Truman. This is a really awesome scholarship that I think anyone who's studying a critical language should apply for, and it's a free summer through the State Department to learn a critical language. And in my case, it's what really helped my Chinese get from kind of bad to pretty decent. And then the Boren Awards as well is, I mean, it comes with a 1-year federal service requirement to work at the government. But if you want to do that, if you want to work in public service, it's great. So why Chinese, for me, is a bit different than most people. I think a lot of people choose to study Chinese because they're really interested in the language or the culture or the 5,000 years of history or martial arts or Kung Fu Panda. But for me, it was really random. I chose Chinese because I had to do 4 semesters of language for my environmental sustainability degree. So since I had to do 4 semesters, I was like, well, Chinese should be useful. More so, it's also useful generally. I was like, okay, well, China is a very, very large country. They have lots of environmental problems. If I want to study the environment, I should study Chinese. But I really had no personal connection to Chinese. One of my best friends was Taiwanese American, so I was like, oh, I could learn Mandarin and then talk with your parents, and it'd be cool. But there was no other like deep connection or deep desire. But once I went to China, I thought, oh wow, this is really, really awesome. So my first time to China was in 2013 with Zhang Laoshi in Kunming, which is a city out here in the southwest. This is me at OEU Study Center at Yunnan University, and this is at the Mulijiang. I was like, wow, this country is beautiful and gorgeous and so different, and there's spicy food everywhere. And I was 19 and could get, I don't know, I could be independent and go out and have a good time, but also go and get crazy awesome street food at night, and meet lots of people who just wanted to figure out who I was, because it's very rare to see people in Kunming. And then I went back. This is in Xi'an. This was through the State Department. Xi'an's really where I got a greater appreciation for the history of China, because it's the old imperial capital. It used to be called Chang'an, which means long peace. And I was like, Xi'an is so cool. And that's where my Chinese got a lot better. And then I studied abroad in Beijing for a year. So this is me in Beijing with a really terrible haze, and then that's a trip to Shanghai with my friend. That was one of the best, obviously being in China for a year really helps with Chinese. And then after that I wanted to tour around, so I went to Taiwan, and I toured around Taiwan for around 2 months. So the Chinese matters part comes in 2 reasons. I think that Chinese has got 2 different values to it. It's got the use value, so in that, okay, well 20% of the world speaks Chinese or a dialect of Chinese. 1/5 of the world, in terms of population, lives in China or in Singapore or is part of the Chinese diaspora community around the world. So China has a huge economy. We always talk about economic growth. So China's, in a lot of ways, really, really useful for the job market. It helps with you can go to China a lot more easily if you have some language ability. So I think the use value aspect of Chinese is super interesting. But for me, I think it's not clear to me right now, at least as a graduating senior, that my upcoming career is going to involve Chinese. I'm going to be in DC after this year, and then I may be in DC working for the Forest Service for a while after. I'm not going to be using Chinese on the day-to-day, chances are. So what value does Chinese have then for me in that specific career? And I'd say Chinese has lots of personal value. So for me, it's just really fulfilling to kind of learn this very, very different language from English. So it's a category 5 language. What that means is that the State Department lists different languages based on their difficulty. So a category 1 language is like Afrikaans, which is based on Dutch, and it's really similar to English, or Spanish. Category 2 language, a little bit harder, like German, got some complicated grammar. Category 3 languages usually are just different from English, but they have really simple grammar, like Indonesian or Swahili. So they're hard, but they're not, I mean, they're used so broadly in their regions they become so simplified. Category 4 languages are languages like, like Hindi or Bengali, like they're languages that are very, very different from English. And then the jump between a category 4 language, the State Department says it takes like 44 hours a week of study for a year to be fluent or something. I don't know what the exact way is, but it's double that for category 5 language. So Arabic, Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. So I think it's so cool to like go from no languages at all, or like no, for me, at least for me, no experience in Chinese to then being able to speak it kind of okay now. In that, it's just really, really fun to learn, and I really like the challenge of that. And then next, it encourages diligence and commitment, because I have to study Chinese every single day. So I have an app called Anki, and I pretty much go through flashcards every single day for an hour. And in my opinion, it's really use it or lose it. It can come back, but if you don't constantly sort of practice your vocabulary or practice grammar, you don't get as much out of the language. And then finally, you're forced to think in a different way. And this is, I think, evolved a lot with studying linguistics with Leo Lauscher, in that we talk a lot about the different ways that languages can affect your thought processes. And with Chinese, it's very different when I have to think in Chinese because of the way that the language is structured. And I think it's very valuable. So like in Chinese, not just because of the language, but also the culture, like you're always referencing prior thinkers and how important those thinkers are to today. And it's not like you have a new idea. And you use more inclusive language, like we can see this. And when trying to use more advanced Chinese, like the idioms, each idiom is like 4 characters, and you often have really, really long histories. And you can look them up, and it's like something about a turtle shell and like a magician, and it means something totally mundane. So there's really cool value in trying to contextualize all that in your thinking patterns. So this personal value, I think, is what's most important. Oh, these are going to go really slow, aren't they? Okay. Those are supposed to all go at once, and there's supposed to be a big reveal of really cool things about Chinese. So one thing is the Chinese character system. Before I ever studied Chinese, I didn't really have a great grasp on this, but it's been really, really valuable in the later stages of studying, sort of go back and say, okay, well, what really are Chinese characters? I think there's such beauty in them. For people who've never studied Chinese before, it doesn't really make sense. You just look at them, and they may not have any, it's hard to like decode what they mean, but in studying it, I think there's so much value in figuring out ways to memorize them and how each character can be broken down into different radicals and different pieces, and you can create stories based off of radicals. So like, my name is a rooftop radical and then the woman radical. So like a woman under a roof would be at peace, you'd think in ancient China. That's like a story you can tell. That may not be the original story of the character, but that's you know, one thing. Or the word for home itself is a roof and then a pig. So a pig under a roof would be a home. So these are things that as a first year student, I never really grasped or never really took the time to think about. But then as I studied more and more, I thought it was just super interesting, and I really, really valued it. And then the second is, I put this little dragon there, more so that's for Chinese culture, because I'm from Oklahoma City and I'd never been abroad before, other than to Canada, before I went to China. So for me, learning about Chinese culture or just experiencing Chinese culture or just living in a different country was really cool and had a lot of value, because I think oftentimes, especially recently, there's lots of talk about China, and maybe in the news media from people who don't really understand China. So it's really, I think, different to have that kind of perspective of studying Chinese as a gateway into this different culture. Then the third thing I put is all these different Chinese internet companies, because I think it's so crazy that some of these companies are the biggest companies on the planet, and if you ask the average American, they'll have no idea what it is. So like Baidu is like the Chinese Google, and if any company is going to develop like some of the AI that Google's trying to develop, it's going to be Baidu's one of their biggest competitors. But most Americans have never heard of Baidu. But being able to like go to Baidu and search on things, I think that's kind of cool. Or Weibo, that's the Chinese like Twitter. So it's slightly different use because it's censored a lot more. But you do get really, really interesting looks into Chinese culture. Like things will go viral in China, and there are things that are totally different from America, but in some ways they're really similar. They have really similar evolution of memes and like challenges that teens will do. And it's just, it's weird because most Americans don't ever get a picture of that because Chinese people don't use the same websites that American people do. Chinese people in China don't, for the most part. And then sort of being able to learn Chinese and then through that access this whole new part of the internet that's like huge that no one else accesses is really cool. And then this is the app that I use all the time for language study, Anki. And the reason I put it on there is because it goes back to this commitment thing, in which I think I've been to China 3 times now, and each time that I go, I've gotten a better understanding of how to study Chinese. It's one of those things where I think you could have a first semester Chinese course in which you don't learn any Chinese. That would be really helpful if it just teaches you how to study. So like what do all the different components of the radicals mean? How can you create stories for those? How memorization of set phrases is more useful than memorizing individual characters. The importance of repetition. So for me, when I first studied Chinese, I didn't know a lot of this huge wealth of information exists like online on different blogs and things. And then the second time when I was in China, in Xi'an, I was like, okay, well now I know a lot more about how to study for it, so it's a lot more efficient. And then my second semester in Beijing, when I was at Tsinghua University, that's where it like jumped up another level. So now that I know how to study for it, like the efficiency of learning a language got so much faster. So that's one thing where it's been very valuable for me is that I've then taken the approach of learning Chinese to other things. So now I use the same like memorization software for any other memorization that I have to do. So that's like the large extent of what my talk wanted to be, is that I think Chinese has a lot of personal value because I know that Logan's gonna be talking about the business aspect, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so the use value per se. And then also I wanted to just make it kind of short so if people had questions I could do that. So that's my broad Chinese Matters presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. So it was great to hear a student's perspective of what we can offer and what we should offer in the future. The first year class is a wonderful idea, right? We should do more of these in the future. I think I'll go to Dorgan now, and then the both of you can take questions together.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Dorgan. So also, Kendrick Holmes, he also majored in economics and Chinese, of course, double major, not triple major here, and he's